with the electoral process, completely illegal, wrong, needs to be looked at and
to look at it, it's looking at one particular community and how they voted in that by-election.
But there's a difference between that, isn't there, and Muslim voters deciding reasonably en masse that there are certain parties that represent their interests, and they come to that view as individuals. Ethnic minority communities have always done that.
Before we dive into the clash that unfolded on live television, it's worth setting the stage, because what happened here wasn't just a routine political interview. It was one of those moments where a politician walks into a conversation expecting a friendly narrative, and instead finds themselves slowly cornered by their own words. In this video, we're going to watch former Home Secretary Priti Patel step into exactly that kind of situation. What starts as a discussion about the recent Gorton and Denton by-election quickly turns into something much more uncomfortable, because as the questions begin to stack up, the logic behind her argument starts to unravel, and the contradictions become impossible to ignore. At the center of the controversy is a claim coming from parts of the conservative camp that the by-election revealed some kind of coordinated Muslim bloc vote. A serious accusation, and one that carries major implications about how democracy functions in diverse communities. But here's where things get interesting. During the interview, Patel is pressed on the details of that claim, and suddenly the conversation shifts. The host begins pointing out examples that make the argument look less like a principled concern and more like a glaring double standard. And once those examples come up, the discussion takes a turn that Patel clearly wasn't expecting. So in just a moment, we're going to watch how this exchange unfolds in real time. Because what happens next is a textbook example of how political talking points can collapse when they're tested under even a little bit of scrutiny. But before we dive into the full story, comment where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now, let's take a look at how this conversation started.
Weakness.
Briefly, in other news, domestic news, lots of Labour pain in the Gorton by-election, of course. But isn't the other lesson of that by-election that if you want to oppose this government from the right in seats in urban northern England and similar, that you vote for a party getting 27% of the vote, i.e. Reform, not a minor party status in seats like this, yours, with 2%?
So I think we have to remember that that particular constituency was Labour's sixth most safest seat. You know, we were not contenders in that by-election at all. The real issue about that by-election, the real story, is just the fact that people have lost faith in this government and in Keir Starmer. He's got no authority whatsoever.
No faith in you in their place.
I've made it quite clear to you that is not a Conservative seat where we were in contention. It is Labour's.
You should do better in it.
It was Labour's sixth safest seat. So on that basis alone, it was clear that it was a battle for Labour and Labour's vote, and Labour is a party of the left, and people have chosen to abandon
and if you're
the
on the
Labour
right,
Party.
If you're on the right, which 27% of the people in that constituency are, they turn to Reform and not you.
Well, I don't know how you can describe Reform. I'm not here to be a commentator on Reform.
They're a party of the right, aren't they?
I'm telling you now. Well, they
got lots of your ex-colleagues in for a start.
Well, they voted with Labour on on various issues such as welfare and the two-child cap. So I don't think they can.
You don't think they're a party of the right?
They can't associate themselves with the Conservative Party.
They don't want to do that.
So look, the reality is that we were not in contention in that seat, and it was Labour's sixth most safest seat. So this is obviously a crisis in the Labour Party.
Your leader released a statement in the aftermath of that by-election where she described, quote, Labour created the monster of the Muslim community bloc vote. What does she mean by that?
Well, she was pointing out to the sectarian voting that is clearly now taking place.
Why is it sectarian?
But on the basis that it was very much targeted at particular... I mean, if you look at some of the tactics that the Green Party have used and all the rest of it, and the fact now that potentially the Electoral Commission are looking into the voting trends and patterns that took place in that constituency, Lewis, we should be concerned about that.
We should,
we live in a democracy, and that should be looked at. So I don't think we can overlook that issue whatsoever.
No, nor should we. But aren't, Dame Priti, those two quite distinct things? Obviously, if there's been any interference with the electoral process, completely illegal, wrong, needs to be looked at and
to look at it, it's looking at one particular community and how they voted in that by-election.
But there's a difference between that, isn't there, and Muslim voters deciding reasonably en masse that there are certain parties that represent their interests, and they come to that view as individuals. Ethnic minority communities have always done that throughout democratic history. Why is it a problem when Muslims do it?
Well, primarily in this particular case, because it's specific to this particular by-election, I think we should just recognise that.
Connie was talking about something that happened more historically than that. She's talking about Labour created the monster of the Muslim community bloc
because, of
vote.
course, they have recently, clearly been playing the Muslim community in terms of securing their own electoral base.
You mean targeting the Muslim community?
Their politics when it comes, look at the politics in their own own
But
party.
your party has, for example, targeted British Indian voters in recent elections. Why is that any different?
No, that's a choice for them in terms of how they vote. We're not telling them how to vote.
But that's a choice for Muslims, how they vote.
I think in this by-election it was very particular, and I think now that there are going to be potentially investigations
Let me just play
by
this.
the Electoral Commission.
This is a video that the 2019 election that your then colleague Shailesh Vara put out aimed specifically at British Indian voters.
देश को आज बचाना है, इस देश को आज बचाना है, कुछ करके हमें दिखाना है, तो वोट करो बोरिस जॉनसन, वोट करो बोरिस जॉनसन, ब्रिटेन के पीएम बनेंगे बोरिस जॉनसन, बोरिस जॉनसन.
Conservatives, British Indians. Is that sectarian?
That is part of an election campaign, a national election campaign that all political parties do.
That's what the Green Party were doing, targeting
I'm
Muslim
sure
voters.
you could have shown the one for the Labour Party that they probably ran in that election and other
I'm not
political
saying
parties
it's
as
improper,
well.
but your leader
The
is saying there's
issue
something
here,
improper about
Lewis,
targeting particular
I think
communities.
we should absolutely say in this instance, this could potentially be looked at by the Electoral Commission in terms of voting patterns within the Muslim community. That is something not to be dismissed or taken lightly.
I'm not
and I think
dismissing
on
it.
that basis, until we see further details, which are now being questioned, the Labour Party has clearly been targeting, and we saw that during the last general election against the Gazan independents, and we know that they're incredibly insecure now as a political party, and they have been targeting the Muslim vote through their own national policies, such as
different parties
Palestine
target
two-state solutions.
different votes. Historically, the Jewish vote,
It
Indian
has
vote.
changed, Lewis. It has changed. You've seen that. You've seen that since the last general election, and the way the Labour Party in particular have been behaving around Gaza and their own voter base. And I think that was tantamount and paramount in this particular by-election.
One final thing.
So, now that you've seen that exchange, let's actually talk about what just happened there for a second. Because honestly, the level of hypocrisy on display is pretty hard to ignore. What we're hearing from parts of the conservative side and the harder right is this dramatic claim that the Green Party somehow did something suspicious in the Gorton and Denton by-election, simply because they campaigned on issues that resonate with Muslim voters. And their acting like that alone should trigger investigations and alarms. But hold on a second, because the obvious question is this: how is it suddenly wrong when the Greens speak to Muslim voters, but completely normal when the Conservatives target other communities? I mean, we've literally seen Conservative campaign material aimed directly at British Indian voters in past elections. That happened. Nobody called that some kind of threat to democracy. That's just campaigning. Every political party does this. They speak to different groups: young voters, older voters, homeowners, business owners. That's how modern politics works. So when the rules suddenly change depending on who the voters are, people start asking questions. And here's another detail that makes the outrage look even stranger. The majority of the electorate in that constituency is actually white, around 57%. So the idea that a small minority somehow took over the election, well, the numbers just don't support that story. Which makes this whole controversy look a lot less like a genuine concern, and a lot more like frustration that voters simply chose a party that actually spoke to them.